It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, the family of the Belfast attack victim condemns last night's violence. Extra police are on the streets tonight after unrest that forced 27 people from their homes, according to a government minister who says people were targeted because of the colour of their skin.
I don't think any of us will ever be able to forget the image of a 9-year-old child and their family being put in the back of a Land Rover to be rescued from violent, racist thugs who were seeking to undermine them and to undermine their very sense of belonging in a country that many had lived in for decades.
Today, it was revealed that the victim in the shocking scenes on Monday night, Stephen Ogilvie, lost an eye in that attack. Hadi Al-Adid, the 30-year-old man accused of attempted murder, appeared in court earlier today. He was remanded in custody until July. Now, amid calls for calm tonight, we'll hear from community leaders in Belfast asking people of all faiths to stand together. And we'll discuss the government's plans for an immigration crackdown as Sky News learns ministers are preparing to step up their efforts to track down illegal immigrants in Northern Ireland. Good evening. A government minister has described those behind the unrest in Belfast last night as violent, racist thugs who forced 27 people from their homes. Lady Anderson, who's a minister in the Cabinet Office, claimed people went door to door looking for foreign nationals, with the youngest victim just 2 months old. The violence was sparked by the knife attack that happened on Monday night, and today it was revealed the victim of that attack, Stephen Ogilvie, had lost an eye. His family is urging people not to use the attack as an excuse for unrest. But in the past hour, a crowd has gathered near a hotel that's believed to be housing asylum seekers. From Belfast, Sky's Dan Whitehead reports.
As Belfast burned, a young family is bundled into a riot van, fleeing for their lives from their home, engulfed in flames. The morning after reveals the true extent of the damage, and the community torn by violence was clear to see.
I've lost a home, mate. 13 years out here, and that's gone. The house is wrecked, mate. The whole house is completely destroyed, from top to bottom.
What's your message to the people who have wrecked your property?
They've done it to one of their own. One of their own. I understand they're all angry and all that, but I've just lost a home.
Boys just go to bed. I have 2 boys and 1 girl. It was a terrifying moment that I don't know how I could describe the moment. The smoke was coming in, the alarm was on, constantly on, and I don't know what to tell the kid.
Nobody deserves any of this at all. They're just taking us back 50 years. Only they're putting a different name on it. They're putting racism on it. So, I don't know.
Described by leaders here as outright thuggery, all this was sparked by the attack on Stephen Ogilvie on Monday night. In court this morning, it emerged the victim in his 40s lost his left eye. In a statement, his family condemned the violence that followed. We want to make it absolutely clear, they said, that overnight unrest is not welcome and peaceful protest is the only way forward. The Sudanese suspect, Hadi Al-Adid, appeared via video link at Belfast magistrates, refused bail. He'll be back in court next month. As the community recovers, condemnation from politicians.
People are rightly sickened by the horrific attack on Monday night in North Belfast. As you have just said, the man arrested has been in court in Belfast this morning and charged. We are united in calling for calm and determined to restore order, support the police and all those on the front line, and ensure that justice is done.
We know the suspect arrived in Northern Ireland via Dublin in 2023, receiving refugee status. The First Minister of Northern Ireland not wanting to be drawn on worries about migration over the border with Ireland.
Well, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there in terms of immigration. Of course, immigration needs to be controlled. Of course, we need to have control over borders. There's no country in the world that doesn't have control of their borders. But I want to see an immigration system that is both enforceable, that is human rights compliant, that is stands up to international standards, that is like something that everybody can understand. But I think that's a debate for another day.
It's understood that 27 people have been made homeless in Belfast because of the violence. Reports foreign nationals were targeted, the focus of questions in the House of Lords.
I don't think any of us will ever be able to forget the image of a 9-year-old child and their family being put in the back of a Land Rover to be rescued from violent, racist thugs who were seeking to undermine them and to undermine their very sense of belonging in a country that many had lived in for decades.
What led to this destruction, the core reasons behind it, may well be far bigger than Monday night's attack alone. Regardless of that, Belfast is holding its breath, with a warning to those intent on further violence. Anyone attacking any community can expect prison. The message from the judge in court today, one he said should be sent out loud and clear. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Belfast.
Well, this is the live view this evening from our helicopter over an area north of Belfast, on the north of the city, called Chimney Corner, where you can see groups of people have gathered. Look, we're not going to say the violence is comparable to what happened last night, if at all, but the police are certainly on the scene, keeping an eye on things, and people are gathering. It looks like they may have piles of things like bricks, and I'm sure you can guess what their intention is, potentially. Let's bring in our correspondent, Tom Parmenter, who is nearby. Tom, what's happening? It looks like there's some smoke billowing behind you. Is that anything to do with this?
There is a small fire that seems to be under control behind us. We've spent the evening in the city centre, and I have to say it is vastly different to what we saw at the same time last night. It is much quieter. The streets deserted in some places, and we've just seen very minor incidents in the city centre itself. But this is the Sandy Knowles roundabout, just north, about 10 minutes north of Belfast city centre. And as I say, a water tanker has been set on fire behind us. There is a police water cannon vehicle, the white one, behind us. And if we just spin round on the Sandy Knowles roundabout, you can see a police line here, and beyond that a group of protesters, and we'll just walk up a bit closer so we can see a bit more of what is going on tonight. And as Dan said in his report, the warnings today have been so explicit, so clear to people not to come out and cause the kind of problems that we saw last night, where we had mobs setting fire to properties often linked to ethnic minority residents or businesses. And it's been called out in the strongest possible terms today for what it is, racist mob activity. And we have seen here, as I say, about 10 minutes north of the city centre, a significant gathering of people looking to cause trouble. You can see the pictures overhead as well of what is going on beyond the police lines that are directly behind me. But this is an area where there is a property that has housed migrant asylum seekers, and that has been the scene previously of protests, and it seems that that connection may be being reignited this evening, despite all of those really strong warnings from the Prime Minister, from the Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and this one of fewer flashpoints tonight. As I say, across the rest of the city, we've not seen gatherings of people with balaclavas and face coverings. We've seen just a handful of those from our perspective on the streets of Belfast tonight. But as you can see here, 10 minutes north of the city, another significant policing operation that is underway to try to quell any further violence. And the warning from the police service here is that anyone who is found to be instigating this, whether it's online or directly on the streets, that they can expect the full force of the law to be brought upon them. And as you can see here tonight behind us, a bit of a standoff at the moment with police with their riot shields, a group that I can see in the distance gathered on the next junction, and as we've seen from some of those aerial pictures, large rocks and stones being accumulated, and we will wait and see what happens here tonight. It's been condemned widely across society here as what happened last night, of those businesses and homes being targeted, and so often innocent people being caught up in the very worst of that kind of mob violence on the streets in response, of course, to the horrific incident, the stabbing that we saw here on Monday night. So it is tense, but it is also very quiet across many parts and communities of Belfast tonight. One local man said to me it felt like COVID times. It was that quiet because schools had closed, public transport closed down, shops all closed, and it really does feel on edge. But from what we've seen tonight, it has been contained to this one particular incident so far, and the authorities, politicians, community leaders hoping and pleading that it doesn't escalate once more.
Tom, thanks very much indeed for the time being. I know we'll come back to you if anything changes there. But joining me now is the South Belfast MLA and leader of the opposition for the Social Democratic and Labour Party, Matthew O'Toole. Good evening to you. I want to go straight into these warnings, these strong words from leaders, from the police. Do they filter down to the people who are actually hell-bent on causing trouble and violence?
Well, I hope so. It's hard to know, and part of the challenge we have is that we are existing now in this strange social media universe of misinformation, disinformation, and bad actors, malign individuals and forces online who are filling people's heads with extremism, garbage, misinformation. Clearly, the events of Sunday night were grotesque and appalling, and the video that was shared so widely has shocked people. People are entitled to have opinions about it. They're even entitled to have, strong views about immigration. But the response we've seen has been something close to a racist pogrom last night, an attempted pogrom anyway in Belfast. We can't underestimate that, and we can't mince our words when we talk about it. So I welcome the fact that there have been strong warnings from ourselves, other political leaders. I have to say some political leadership in Northern Ireland has not been as clear-throated and as unequivocal as it should have been. And so I think this is going to be a challenge moving forward. We need to have a peaceful night in Belfast tonight. I'll be out again in my constituency where I had to help dozens of people last night, families with young children. I had to shelter them. I had to move them to another shelter. So the seriousness of what happened last night cannot be overstated.
You mentioned other people there, other parties. I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? Because this is not the time for party politics, is it?
No, certainly not. And it's exactly the kind of moment when one would want to have complete unanimity of purpose and unanimity of message around, first of all, of course, people completely incensed and disgusted by the violent crime that happened, the apparently attempted murder of Mr. Ogilvy, and our thoughts are with him and his family. And I welcome the fact that they've, at a time of great distress for them, been willing to issue words of, I suppose, telling people or asking people, pleading with people not to seek, as it were, retribution. I welcome that. We do want to see unanimity of purpose. One or two, and I don't want to name names, but one or two representatives of political parties have been less clear in their condemnations of violence than I think they could and should have been. And I think there have been politicians in Britain specifically who pay no attention to Northern Ireland for 364 days of the year. And after this grotesque act of violence, this tragedy on Sunday night, were lightning fast to leap on that tragedy and use it to foment anger, hatred, and the kind of essentially extreme reaction that they thrive on. I'm talking about people like, particularly people like Rupert Lowe, Nigel Farage, and of course, others, even more extreme actors online, like Tommy Robinson. So I would want to see unanimity of purpose and unanimity of voice. I don't think we've seen it.
But how do you then counter those narratives that you say are reaching people and somehow spurring them on to cause violence? How do you counter those messages? How do you reach them and tell them that you think that is wrong and there is another reason for things like this happening?
Well, clearly in relation to the people who are going out and committing these acts, trying to put people out of their homes, in some cases, as in last night, putting people out of their homes, there need to be multiple things that happen. The first thing that needs to happen is there needs to be a robust criminal justice response. The police, understandably and possibly correctly last night, wanted to stand back initially because people were gathering. They clearly didn't want to look too heavy-handed in their initial policing response. Some people might have interpreted that as permission to run rampant, and some did. The policing response tonight, I think, is going to be somewhat different, I would hope, and the criminal justice response needs to follow up. And we've seen people in court today with swift, decisive and punitive action on those who commit these acts. In some cases that will be regrettable, because it will be young people, teenagers, people in relatively young, getting criminal records when you would want to avoid that, but they do need to understand their consequences. That's number one. Number two is the political discourse needs to respect and acknowledge the gravity of what's happened. We have allowed this discourse to drift to a position of kind of double talk at times, where people say, but there's, there are legitimate concerns. People can have legitimate concerns about any issue, immigration, whatever, that's fine. But going out and burning people out of their homes is not a legitimate response. So the response needs to be twofold. And of course, then we need to think about real regulation of social media platforms, because it's getting out of control and it is undermining our democracy and it's undermining the safety of our communities, including people of colour.
Matthew O'Toole, MLA, appreciate you joining us this evening. We're going to head straight back to North Belfast, where, as you can see with our pictures there, the police are now using water cannon. Let's bring in our correspondent, Tom Parmenter, to describe what's happening on the ground. Tom.
Yeah, you can see the water cannon now being deployed into a crowd of, it's hard to say, but a couple of hundred people, many of them masked, that are further down this road. We're just off the Sandy Knolls roundabout, at about 10 minutes north of Belfast city centre, and it is precisely the thing that everyone has been pleading with locals to avoid. You can see quite a few missiles coming over, quite a lot of big bricks that are coming over. So we're keeping our distance at this stage. The police have chosen to try and douse down the crowd with the water cannon, which is a tactic used here in Northern Ireland more than we see in the rest of the UK. And the crowd that you can see very persistent in voicing their concerns, and I can see a fire also that's been lit, which might be one of the reasons why the water cannon has now been deployed. But the fire is about 150 metres down this road. As you can see, masked men hurling house bricks that have been smashed up towards. Again, we're being moved back a bit further by the officers. We're just being asked to move back, understandably, and it gives you a sense that, again, in some communities in Northern Ireland, it is once again very tense. The one flashpoint that we've seen this evening, it's not the multiple spread of events that we saw last night, but again, another serious incident of disorder that really is testing the police service. They are coming under attack from missiles, and it is the kind of thing that everyone has tried to warn against, that the consequences for this kind of behaviour will be severe, but it is an indicator of just how tense things are, that once again you've got a crowd of some 200 masked youths, men, whatever age they are, out attacking the police once again tonight, and now being repelled by water cannon.
Tom, let me just ask you, and this sounds a bit of a simple question, but it's worth asking. What's the weather been like there today? Because when it is raining, people tend not to come out. And I can see it's sunny now, and of course it's the evening. You wonder if people been there all day, or if they just come out in the evening, have they just come out with the sun coming out? Maybe they've got jobs and they've finished work for the day. I mean, what's it been like the past couple of hours, or is this just flared up now?
This particular incident has just flared up in the last 20, 30 minutes or so. Throughout the day, it's been quite calm. It's been eerily quiet in many communities across Belfast, as schools have closed early, shops have closed their shutters, and people have wanted to step back from carrying on as normal because of the situation, the mob violence that we saw in some communities here last night. And the weather has been raining this afternoon. It's come out fine this evening, which does sometimes add to the numbers of people on the street in these kinds of situations. And you have very light evenings as well at this time of the year. So it is another depressing episode of violence that will no doubt be condemned once again. You can see a lot of those protesters really going at the police lines behind us now, hurling big house bricks. I've got one just in front of me here that came through the police lines. These are house bricks that have been smashed up, gathered together and used as ammo against the police. And you can hear fireworks going off as well behind us in the crowd. There's a fire that's been lit further down this road. And it's a bit of a chaotic situation, one that the police are used to dealing with and will have everything at their disposal to deal with it. As I say, this is just the one flashpoint that we've seen tonight across Belfast. Many communities just very quiet. We saw a small gathering of a few men with face coverings that was very quickly broken up when we were closer to the city this evening, the police service getting onto those individuals. But it's a numbers game. When you have a big crowd like this down here, maybe 200 or so massed individuals, then it is obviously much more difficult to control quickly. But if it's just a pocket of people, 2, 3, 4, as we saw in a couple of instances in the city earlier, then the police were moving in, dealing with it and stopping any problems before they started. But the problems that we can see behind us now, another episode in this round of violence that has broken out since that horrific stabbing in this city a few nights ago.
Tom, thank you very much indeed for the time being. I know you'll keep an eye on that. But next, the police service of Northern Ireland say people's home addresses were shared on social media during last night's disorder in Belfast. Protesters carried out arson attacks on several private homes, with the Prime Minister and Cabinet Minister Lady Anderson both suggesting people were targeted because of their background. Joining me now is Kashif Akram from the Belfast Islamic Centre. Good evening to you. How were things for you last night? Because I gather the police told you to effectively shut up shop for your own safety.
That's right, Matt. Firstly, though, I would like to take this opportunity, personally and on behalf of the Belfast Islamic Centre, to extend our prayers and thoughts with the victim, the family of the victim, as well as the wider community who have been impacted by the horrific event that took place on Monday, and what obviously then continued, and we're still seeing that tonight on the streets. It has been horrible. We woke up on Tuesday morning to news that sent shocks throughout the whole community. And really what we're witnessing at the moment, Matt, it's deeply disturbing. It's obviously following a criminal act by one individual. Innocent families who had absolutely no involvement, and they find themselves being targeted now. Homes, as you've mentioned, have been attacked. Vehicles have been burned, and families, including children, they've been forced to flee for their safety. There were scenes of families being rescued by fire services. Their home had been torched. Had the fire services not been there, it would have been devastating. The outcome there.
Now, can I ask you?
Yeah.
And this is something I spoke to a guest about last night. Of course, violence is perpetrated on other people by all sorts of people for all sorts of reasons. But when you learned of who this man was, did your heart sink thinking there would be possibly this kind of response?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. Obviously, the news itself, regardless of who's involved, victim or attacker, it's horrible. Your heart sinks. Yes, when you do realise, it's somebody maybe of colour. Of course, we have seen repeated pattern where people are targeted because of their ethnicity, nationality, skin colour, or perceived background, and that's racism, and that's what we're witnessing right now on the streets of Belfast. And there's no place for that in Belfast or anywhere else. But unfortunately, the outcome, of one individual is collective punishment for entire communities, which should not be allowed.
And look, I've read accounts of other people, regardless of their own background, having Muslim neighbours knock at their door, say, can you take my children, look after my children, we need to make sure they're safe so we can keep an eye on things. Do you then look at this and realise that the majority of the community want to support each other?
Well, absolutely. In Belfast, we have made great progress over the years, enormous progress. The majority of individuals in Belfast are decent living people. The hate, the thugs you see in the streets now are a very small minority. But you can see the impact, the damage, and the fear they're spreading. And again, this is something as a wider community we have to get together to come up with solutions, build relationships, and find ways to tackle this. This is something I think heavily that the politicians should really be working on as well, rather than sometimes what we feel is directing the blame to the most vulnerable, who are our immigrants, is to take ownership of some of the shortfalls, whether that be housing, whether that be jobs, whether that be with our NHS, and to educate people basically why immigration is important, why migrants are important to our community, and the contribution, most valuable contribution that they do make to our society.
But that's the key to this, isn't it? It's bridging that gap between what you know and a lot of the community knows to be happening, and getting these, let's be honest, by and large, young men, and we're seeing the police move in on this group in the north of Belfast right now, having used their water cannon. They're young men with frustrations of some degree, perhaps completely unreasonable, and they've been misguided and swallowed misinformation. But how do you get through to them? How do you say, look, these two Ugandan carers who are scared for their lives are actually looking after someone who could be your grandma? Why is it not getting through to them?
Absolutely. I do strongly believe we can get through to them. If our politicians did step up, we've done it with loan sharks, we've done it with paramilitaries, we've done it with drug abuse, we use radio, we use simple education pieces on public transport.
But then, Kashif, let me ask you, do they just move from scapegoat to scapegoat then? They're looking for an outlet of their frustration regardless of what that scapegoat is. Is that what you think?
Well, absolutely. Again, there's intent behind there as well. There's a handful of individuals maybe that intentionally are misguiding people, spreading misinformation. You can see it on social media. Misinformation is rife. So this is something that is obviously need to be tackled. This is where our communities come together and put an end to misinformation. Of course, the Islamic Centre itself, we do open days. Our doors always open to all communities. We love people from all communities to come in, have that chat, to understand one another. We also work very closely with other faiths. We do a lot of work across communities as well. And it's important, we work together in bridging these gaps, definitely.
By the same token, this man doing this horrible attack, and I'm being careful here because court proceedings are active and the person accused is going to appear again next month. It really has nothing to do with Muslims in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. And, you know, you often hear when things happen, people say, why do I have to answer these questions for the millionth time when there's a million reasons why something like this can happen? It's nothing to do with our faith.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. You know, the suspect is one person. The people being attacked are entire families. Justice means, you know, holding the individual responsible to account. Racism it simply means blaming and attacking innocent people because of who they are, and we must never really confuse the two. You know, and as you've seen recently, the homes, you know, when homes are targeted and families are driven out, and people are attacked because of their ethnicity or nationality, it is difficult to describe that as anything other than racism. And you know, yes, you're right in saying. I mean, you know, no religion, whether that be Christianity or Islam or Judaism, you know, no religion promotes what happened on Monday evening or what's currently happening on our streets. So I don't think any religion is to be blamed. It's, you know, again, comes down to educating people and, you know, understanding one another. And this is a big thing. It's missing, but also I can understand the frustration that people have due to the lack of support they're getting from politicians. Again, if they're mentioning things like housing, well, why isn't it being addressed by the politicians? Why is there still over 20,000 properties that are lying vacant, that are actually registered as vacant? Now, Matt, there's no incentive for landlords to declare their property as vacant in Northern Ireland, no sort of rate incentives or anything like that. So I'm assuming there's a lot more than 20,000. 20,000 was recorded on the registry. I mean, there was plans to bring them into use. Why haven't they brought them into use? You know, why, you know, there's answers, of course, that there's questions that need to be answered.
Absolutely, and it certainly sounds like you're saying that there's much more to this. It's a multifaceted problem rather than just down to one particular thing. Really appreciate you joining us this evening. That's Kashif Akram from the Belfast Islamic Centre. Thanks again. Well, Monday night's attack and the resulting violence dominated Prime Minister's question time today, with Tory leader Kemi Badenoch joining Sir Keir Starmer in condemning the violence. Political correspondent Ali Fortescue joins us now from Westminster. Ali, tell us more about what was said in the Lords today.
Well, look, it's been a really interesting day in Parliament, and obviously, you know, the message, unsurprisingly, from the Prime Minister and the Northern Ireland Secretary has been a call for calm. The Prime Minister calling this totally unjustified, as he put it. The Northern Ireland Secretary saying can't justify what he called this thuggish behaviour. We've also heard from Baroness Anderson, who is Cabinet Office Minister in the Lords, and she's given us some confirmation around some of the numbers. So 27 people were made homeless, she confirmed, as a result of those protests overnight. And it wasn't really the protest, was it? It was what we saw with houses being set alight, effectively. So that was interesting in terms of confirming the number 27. But she also talked about the ages. She said that the youngest victim moved from home was just 2 months old. She also said that she will never forget the sight of a 9-year-old and her family being moved away in a car because of, as she put it, rescued from violent, racist thugs. So strong language on all sides of the House. I should also say we have seen Nigel Farage re-emerging. He has not done many press conferences recently. He did do one today, and he was asked about this. He has said, among other things, that things will continue to kick off. He stopped short of condemning what we saw last night, and of course we are seeing scenes on our screens now of what's happening this evening. There is so much politics here, Matt, but, you know, above all, the government's job is law and order, trying to work out how they contain this and make sure it doesn't spark into something bigger.
And Ali, there's been talk of improving sorting out illegal immigration in response to this. Any detail on that?
Yes, so I think there's sort of two key issues, things that are now being debated. And the first is the common travel area. I mean, we all know about this, the lack of a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. It's been enforced for 100 years, something that obviously is a cornerstone of the Good Friday Agreement. It's something that politicians, don't really like to talk about often because it's a sensitive, sort of sacred subject in a sense. But it is something that politicians have been talking about today. The DUP, Unionist Party, putting questions to the Prime Minister, questions asking whether that was the problem. And we have heard from the Northern Ireland Secretary saying that the answer is not to say that the common travel area is a problem, but we do also know from the Prime Minister's spokesperson that security checks at the Northern Ireland border are being ramped up. So there is obviously something active going on there. I also have from a government source who's been talking about the £3.7 billion that we know is being spent on immigration enforcement, telling me that a chunk of that is going to Northern Ireland, and that 1,000 people in the last year have been removed in the last year, and these are people that tried to cross the common travel area illegally. And the second thing that has become very political is indefinite leave to remain, because we know that this man had been granted indefinite leave to remain. That's a tricky subject in the Labour Party. Shabana Mahmood looking to extend it, but having trouble from some of her peers in the party. And Reform, of course, say that they want to scrap it altogether. Yes, indeed, Ali. I think the suspect was given leave to remain as opposed to indefinite, but take your point. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Sky correspondent Tom Parmenter is on that scene in Northern Ireland. Well, look, flames behind you, Tom. We've just seen the water cannon as well, trying to repel those individuals. What's the latest there?
This is a flashpoint tonight. We are on the Antrim Road, just next to the Sandy Knowles roundabout on the M2, about 10 minutes north of Belfast. And this, another scene of significant disorder. The police here in numbers. A fire has been set, as you can see. There's projectiles still coming over. That's why we've got the hard hats on, because we've just seen brick after brick being hurled at the police, and then the water cannon being used to disperse a crowd of probably around 200 or so. It's difficult to tell exactly how many, but we've seen through the course of the last hour or so a water tanker set alight just on the other side of the roundabouts. We've seen a concerted effort to gather together rocks and stones so that they can be used to be hurled at the police. And this is an act of defiance, really, to all those warnings today that if you're involved in this kind of thing, the consequences will be significant. But there is yet another large group of masked up, predominantly men and young teenagers who are just down here kicking off again. And it is a situation where they're just not listening to the warnings and the pleas for calm, the pleas for clear minds as to the self-harm. That's how it was described by some of the authorities today, that this is doing to communities in Northern Ireland. But I have to say, across the rest of the city, away from here, it is much quieter. A lot of the businesses have closed up for much of the afternoon, and schools closed, public transport not running. It feels quite eerie in some parts of Belfast tonight. We've seen significant police numbers, which we knew would be the case based on what the Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland said earlier today, that they have the resources in place to deal with this kind of incident. They, of course, don't want to be, again, seeing a second night of violence, but that is precisely what we have. We've seen a barrage of missiles being thrown over these police lines towards us, and it is very tense. It's a standoff now as we try to push them away from here. There is a property not too far from here that's previously been the site of protests around it being used as a hotel to try to make sure that those protests.
And that somebody tried to gouge his eyes out.
Just bear with us, just 1 second. We're just trying.
You're reporting on why Northern Ireland is is erupting because they are fed up with the likes of Sinn Féin inviting undocumented men into their country. Why are you wearing a crash helmet? Get down the front and be brave.
Yeah, you can just appreciate Thomas being accosted there, someone not wanting to give their views. We'll come back to Tom in a minute and obviously keep an eye on that situation with the water cannon and people hurling missiles at police. But, of course, the attack, as I'm sure you've seen, has sparked a fresh conversation on immigration. The suspect in the attack entered Northern Ireland from the Republic of Ireland and had been given leave to remain in the UK. Joining me now to discuss this is Professor of European Law at Cambridge University, Catherine Barnard. Catherine, thanks for joining us. People will automatically look at that border between Northern Ireland and the Republic and wonder what can be done, if anything, about that. You heard me possibly speaking to my colleague Ali about the government looking to somehow tighten things up, but it runs counter to the Good Friday Agreement, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And not just the Good Friday Agreement, also the Windsor Framework, which is part of the withdrawal agreement, part of the Brexit text, and also contrary to the Common Travel Area. Now, it might be helpful just to unpick some of that. So the Common Travel Area has been around for well over 100 years, and it essentially gives free movement for Irish and UK citizens. Scroll on to the 1970s, when you had the appalling troubles in Northern Ireland, and they were eventually brought to an end by the Good Friday Agreement. Now, the Good Friday Agreement was deemed to say there should be no border between the north and south of Ireland. And that has been almost totemic and something that nothing could touch. And that was fine so long as we were part of the single market when we were in the European Union. But it stopped being fine when there was a Brexit vote. And the Brexit vote meant that there would have to be a border somewhere to separate the UK from the European Union. And of course, that really bit hard in respect of Northern Ireland. And so what you saw happening as part of the Brexit negotiations was that there would be no border between the north and south of Ireland, but there would be what's called an east-west border between the Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And again, this has become sacred. It's become sacred for the EU. It's become sacred for the people in Northern Ireland. But the long and the short of it means that people can move freely from the south to the north, as in this case.
And is there any evidence to show that increases illegal migration, illegal immigration? And when I say illegal immigration, people coming in who really shouldn't be there, I mean, we can't ignore the fact that people will go and will seek asylum and be given leave to remain. That has happened, we understand, with this particular individual. But is there any evidence that because that border has that porousness to it, that more people find it an easy route into Northern Ireland and therefore the UK?
Yes, there's not much research being done on that, but there's some evidence that what you say is true. Now, because there can't be a physical border, a physical check, for the reasons I explained, because of the Good Friday Agreement, and also remember that that border between the north and the south is about 300 miles long, and it crosses private land, farms, it crosses little roads, rivers. It's really difficult to police that border. So what the police service of Northern Ireland do are spot checks, and the same is happening in the south. There is also cooperation between the police on the two sides of the border, but none of that's published for very obvious reasons. And then, of course, if those individuals want to work in the United Kingdom, work in Northern Ireland, they will need to show they've got a right to work. And so the policing is done by employers who are meant to check they've got a right to work, and by landlords who've got to check that they've got a right to rent.
Yes.
All of that's fine as long as employers, landlords play by the books. But if you've got an employer who's prepared to take anybody on cash in hand, then that system starts to break down.
And also, Catherine, look, plenty of people who are on the unionist side of things in Northern Ireland did not want that effective border in the Irish Sea that dealt with the Brexit conundrum. But has it broadly been working, or has it not been a success?
So you're absolutely right. This is the so-called Brexit trilemma. It all takes us back to the sort of 2018, 2019, when we had to work all this through. There were basically three options with Brexit. One was to stay in the customs union and the single market, which was anathema to Boris Johnson. One was to have a border between the north and south of Ireland. That was contrary to the Good Friday Agreement. So there was inevitably going to be a border down the Irish Sea, the so-called east-west border. As you say, the unionists were not happy with that. And in the early days, it was really bumpy. But Rishi Sunak, when he became Prime Minister, negotiated what's called the Windsor Framework, which helped to soften some of the impact of that border. And there were green lanes for lorries coming in from the big supermarkets who could prove the provenance of their goods and who could also ensure that the goods would not go on into the EU via the south of Ireland. And so what you're hearing much less about the problems. So the Windsor Framework has helped. It's also helped, of course, that the rest of the United Kingdom has not diverged significantly from EU rules, and therefore there are the needs for fewer checks.
Interesting, certainly, that this has shone a spotlight on the whole legal framework of all that, Catherine. I appreciate you joining us to talk about it. I'm sure we'll talk again at some point. Thanks for now.
Time.
Well, let's go back to Northern Ireland. Tom Parmenter is there, the police service in Northern Ireland, warning people, Tom, to not be in that area where you are, well, frankly, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, another flashpoint, significant violence. We've seen a number of perhaps 200 or so in the crowd that has gathered on the Antrim Road just next to the M2 motorway north of Belfast. And they've been hurling bricks and stones at the police lines, and the water cannon are deployed just down behind where we are. You can see it from the aerial pictures as well. And they've been using that to push the crowd back to try to contain fires that have been set on this road. And this, a flashpoint, the most significant of the flashpoints tonight, because, as I say, in everything we've seen in the rest of the city, it's been much quieter. We haven't seen the kinds of mob violence going house to house, setting fires in properties particularly connected to ethnic minorities that we saw yesterday evening. But tonight, this one particular flashpoint means that, once again, the police service here are dealing with a very difficult situation.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. Well, the Children's Commissioner in Northern Ireland has said that young people are being robbed of their right to live in safety following scenes of violence in Belfast. Chris Quinn branded the attack and the subsequent disorder profoundly damaging to children who saw what happened. And Chris Quinn joins me now. And just tell us a bit more about those concerns you have for children who have to experience some of this stuff.
Look, thank you for having me on this evening, and I'm watching the pictures on the television with great horror this evening. Actually, the pictures that you see are less than half a mile from my home, and the people on the streets do not represent this community, and they do not represent Northern Ireland. And it makes me very cross to see what's happening. I need to stress that what happened on Monday evening was horrific, and what we saw was traumatising. And I've asked the children and young people, try not to look at the pictures that have been circulating, and certainly do not share them.
It's hard not to, though, isn't it, Chris? And that's the problem. People, look, for reasons of taste, we do not show these things, but people can find them if they want to. Yes. And certainly, you know what teenagers can be like using social media. So how do you tackle that?
Well, look, these things are popping up on our social media without even looking for them. But what I would say is, no matter who you are and what you look like, you do not deserve to walk down the street living in fear. And that's what's happening right now. What happened on Monday was terrible. What happened last night is unforgivable. And our hearts go out to the victim on Monday night and the victims who last night were burnt out of their homes and had their cars attacked. But we've seen the evidence is clear. A lot of this is driven by a small number of people supported by political voices online and right-wing influencers who for years have been normalising division and whipping up tension. And that's the problem. Those online voices are magnifying magnifying a minority. These things do not represent what the vast majority of people here want. And in fact, from my perspective as Children's Commissioner, what we're seeing is damaging. We're seeing schools closing. We're seeing people not being able to access pharmacies and doctor surgeries. Our buses stopped operating. The Education Authority and the Police Service have had to work relentlessly, and children are being denied education. I know that many children didn't make school today because of the colour of their skin and because they were afraid to leave their homes, and these things are unforgivable.
And Chris, let me ask you more about the wider impact on children, because it's a sad thing to say that this kind of thing, look, it's relatively unusual, but Northern Ireland has certainly seen it before. Only a year ago, when violence spilled out of Ballymena and the protests and rioting elsewhere. And of course, if we go further back, people will think of the Troubles. And I mention all this to try and understand what impact that has had on generations of children. Do you have any idea?
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you've highlighted this. I was very... I sat up and listened when Dame Karen Brady made comments today about criminal gangs who have groomed children in Northern Ireland for decades. And you're quite right. Last year, almost a year to the day, we saw the same kind of trouble in Ballymena. And that was, tension was whipped up there. We saw online agitators magnifying hatred, calling people to the streets, children being coerced and groomed. We saw the same in August 2024 on the streets of Belfast. And we have evidence that a lot of that tension and narrative being whipped up online comes from outside of Northern Ireland, comes from places like Great Britain and as far as the USA.
Yeah.
And it's these things, I mean, and I am very aware that child criminal, concerned about child criminal exploitation and how young people get groomed and coerced into these situations.
But when there has been violence on the streets further back, is there evidence that that affected children then who are now fully grown up? Now, is there the sort of a collective trauma, if you like, in some ways, that children have experienced and have then had to grow up with because of the violence that we've seen in the past on the streets of Northern Irish towns and cities?
Look, I'm going to be very candid and honest. I started my youth work career 30 years ago, working in North Belfast on interfaces where we saw violence like this happening. And that's where I carved out the start of my career. Unfortunately, we're seeing the same things repeating themselves. We're seeing these tensions and this division being stoked up. The difference that we're seeing over this past few years is that the racial tensions, the xenophobia, the almost acceptance of these narratives that make division normalised. But yeah, we definitely do have issues with transgenerational trauma. And as a society emerging from conflict, unfortunately, we still have criminal gangs operating in some of our communities.
Really appreciate you talking to us about this tonight. It clearly is a huge issue. And when it involves children and their futures, it's something that a lot of people will find deeply concerning as well. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Let's head back to Tom Parmenter, who is in Northern Ireland, just north of Belfast, just down the road from Chris Quinn's home, as we just heard there, Tom, the Children's Commissioner of Northern Ireland, who shared his concerns. How is the situation right now?
Still tense. It's precisely what the authorities, community leaders, ordinary residents didn't want to see again. But sadly, it has happened. A significant flashpoint here on the Antrim Road, just off the M2 motorway north of Belfast tonight. About an hour and a half or so, where we've seen the police having to push crowds back. A lot of bricks coming from the crowd that is just beyond the police line behind us here. And you can see the big police vehicle, the water cannon in the middle here, which has been used to try to disperse and douse down the fires that have been set by the people who are gathered. A lot of people out on the streets just watching this spectacle, but a significant number, perhaps 100 or 200 of people masked up, face coverings, clearly intent on causing yet further disruption and violence. And it's worth reflecting, I think, on the statement that was put out by the victim of the incident that triggered all of this. earlier this week, Stephen Ogilvy, who lost an eye in that knife attack, and it is something that they called for this kind of thing precisely not to happen. And tonight, it is again.
Well, look, it's not the most straightforward of situations, is it, Tom, that Tom is in there, and inevitably, as he was saying, people will come out to watch what's going on, and then they will notice Tom and our other journalistic colleagues, they're trying to report on what is happening and feel that it's time for them to say their piece as well. Because we don't know how they're going to behave and what they're going to say, and, you know, may end up being offensive, we need to just dip out of that for the time being. But you can see the situation at the moment. Look, a few people kind of just milling around, but as Tom saw, bricks there were broken up. Anyone's guess what those individuals are doing, but perhaps planning to throw something. Bottles, bricks and fireworks seem to be the favoured missiles that they want to throw at the police, and we've seen the police using water cannon in response. This is just north of Belfast, not far from a place called Chimney Corner. And as Tom was saying, the rest of the city comparatively calm tonight. In fact, during the day, people saying it reminded them of COVID times, during those lockdown times, and it was incredibly quiet, which is in stark contrast to what we saw in those residential streets in the city last night. And sadly, many people having to flee, really, for fear of their lives and what violence might be coming their way if they opened the door or stayed put. Tonight, a different picture, but still a concerning one, as our helicopter just keeps an eye on what's going on there. It looks like it's a relative moment of calm here, but in the past hour, we've seen the police using their water cannon and the PCNI warning people not to be in that area. It's anyone's guess what they're up to there. But, you know, they're not just out for a peaceful evening. It doesn't look that way anyway, does it? Possibly collecting more missiles, ready to lob towards the police officers, picking up wheelie bins, who knows what for, but probably not the best idea. We will keep you up to speed on what is going on in Belfast this evening, and hopefully it stays more peaceful than this. Up next, though, it is The World with Barbara Serra.